From the campus of Utah Valley University in Orem, the Utah Debate Commission welcomes you to the 3rd Congressional District Candidates Debate.
Good evening. I'm David McElby, and I'm pleased to have been invited by the Utah Debate Commission to moderate this debate. We are live in the grand ballroom of the Sorensen Center on the campus of Utah Valley University in Orem for a debate between candidates for the U.S. 3rd Congressional District. Tonight, we will hear from the incumbent Republican Representative Jason Chaffetz and from his Democratic challenger Stephen Tryon. We begin with each candidate making a 90-second opening statement. And prior to the start of the debate, it was determined that Stephen Tryon will speak first. Mr. Tryon.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, UVU. It's great to be here. Thanks to the Debate Commission, and thank you, Congressman Chaffetz. My name is Stephen Tryon, and I want you to elect me as your congressman. Tonight, you'll hear different views from my opponent and myself on almost every issue. That's because I've been a leader all my life. And whether I was leading my 1st infantry platoon into a firefight or leading my friends at Overstock in selecting the site for that new $100 million headquarters they just opened up, I've led by picking the best solution on the table and then aggressively troubleshooting that solution until it worked. Because I've learned that there are no perfect solutions. There are just good options implemented effectively by leaders that care about making things work. Congressman Chaffetz sells one side of every story. The side that's best for himself first, what's best for his political party second, and what's best for our country third. That's why he sold us, or tried to sell us, Donald Trump before the recent revelations about Trump's misconduct. It shocked me that our congressman wouldn't make the call on Donald Trump before it was politically necessary. Other prominent Republicans did. Governor Romney did. We have a Congress that has a public approval rating of only 18% because too many members put their personal agendas in front of what is best for our country. It is my duty to be here tonight because I have a track record of putting our country first, even when my life was on the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tryon. Congressman Chaffetz.
Well, thank you. Thank you first and foremost for having me here, to Dr. Magleby, who I took a class from once upon a time, a long, long time ago, to UVU, to the Debate Commission, and to my opponent. I appreciate him stepping forward and offering ideas, and I especially thank you for your military service. And the idea that you would step up and want to provide more service is a very honorable thing. I hope more and more people do it because, quite frankly, we need good people on both sides of the aisle. If you're going to come to this solution, there's no one person that has all the answers. You got to try to drive to get to a bipartisan solution. But I'll say the same thing I said when I very first ran, and I think I've been very true to it, and that is you have to adhere to the Constitution. And I'm fighting for fiscal discipline, limited government, accountability, and a strong national defense. If you get those things right, and we haven't, but if your nation gets those things right, we will be then on the trajectory that we as a nation need to accomplish. So it's an honor and a privilege to serve. And lastly, as we start this opening, I want to especially thank my wife, who puts up with a lot. And our family, it's an honor and a privilege to serve. I am asking the voters to send me back to Washington, D.C. once again. I have had the pleasure to serve as one of only 18 people in the United States Congress out of 435 that are chairman of an authorizing committee. It allows me to help drive the agenda and really hold the people accountable. And I think I've shown time and time again, I buck against my party, I do what's right, I drive forward on principle, and I hope that's shown through nearly 8 years of now serving in the Congress.
Thank you, Congressman Chaffetz. The Utah Debate Commission has established a format that allows each candidate 90 seconds for an initial response to a question. Questions for tonight's debate come from students and individuals who submitted their questions to the Utah Debate Commission website. I'll begin with this question on privacy rights. It is, what actions should Congress take to protect individual privacy in an era of cyber attacks? Congressman Chaffetz, you go first.
I'm so glad you asked that, because it's one of the things I've really helped champion. I think as a suspicionless American, what you have a right to privacy. I've introduced, for instance, what's called the GPS Act. I did it in a bipartisan way with the Democratic senator from Oregon. And it says that the government can't track your geolocation. You know, there was an important Supreme Court case that said they could look at metadata, they could not follow you, the government, but I don't fundamentally trust the government. And if you're a suspicionless American, you should have a right to privacy. I worry about facial recognition. I worry about license plate readers. There's a whole bunch of things that are all done in the name of safety, but aren't necessarily going to make us more secure. One of the first things I did in Congress is fight against the TSA. I think they invade our privacy, and it's something that I've fought to try to change. So we got to be vigilant, got to be careful as parents, and our own computers, but don't think that the federal government has all the solutions to this either.
Mr. Tryon.
Well, I also am a fan of privacy, but I also like the idea of keeping our nation secure. And the fact is, we face some global threats that are insidious and that we have to stay in front of. So there's a balance that has to be struck. And I think that the balance we struck in the wake of 9/11 was a good starting point. Now, I know that as time goes on, we tend to forget the horror of that day. But I want to be aggressive about ensuring that our national defense infrastructure and our national defense agencies have the authority that they need to track terrorism. And for me, if we can personalize metadata and we can appoint people that we trust to the government, and again, here's a point where Congressman Chaffetz and I fundamentally differ. You know, I think if we can't trust our government, we got a problem. Our government is Americans, it's our neighbors, it's our friends. So I've watched Snowden. I'm actually a fan of Snowden, and if I were the president, I would pardon him. But I do think that there's a need for our security services to be able to track and non-personalized data on cell phones and other forms of electronic communication and things like that.
I want to give you time for rebuttal, but I'd like to frame it just a little bit. Given the question about cybersecurity, in your rebuttal or your response, please also comment on the reported Russian use of hacking into the Democratic Party in a way that's rather unprecedented in elections. And what does that raise in terms of cybersecurity for our democracy? Mr. Chaffetz.
We are in a cyber war. America needs to wake up. There is a cyber war that's going on right now, and it's not just with Russia, but China and others that we have to be vigilant about. And one of the big public policy questions is, how do you fire back on that? I don't think that Mr. Snowden is a hero. I would prosecute that person. I think when you go out and steal things, that is fundamentally wrong. I also don't buy the idea that you can just trust your government. I've had my government come after me personally. I started an investigation of the Secret Service. What did they do? 45 Secret Service agents went after me for nothing other than I was doing my job and fulfilling my constitutional duties. So I just don't buy the whole idea that, oh, it's just our friends and neighbors and show them everything. That way we'll be more safe. No way. No how.
Mr. Tryon.
Well, again, if we can't trust our government, then we've lost. We have to be accountable citizens, and we have to engage our government and make sure that the government is responsive to what we want it to do. It has to reflect our values. And so I think that it's very, very important that we have an aggressive cybersecurity capability, offensive and defensive. I was pleased to see that the Department of Defense has stood up a cybersecurity command. But I do think that if we can't trust the government, we're at the wrong place.
We're going to go to our first question. It's from Pierce Bassett. Mr. Bassett.
Hi. Just a few months ago, the American Lung Association ranked Salt Lake City 6th worst in the nation, receiving failing grades in both ozone and particle pollution concentrations. What do you think Congress should do to address this issue, as well as bring more attention to the health issues that are associated with poor air quality?
Mr. Tryon, you go first.
Look, I'm an advocate for clean air, and I think we need to be aggressive about taxing carbon in order to change the dynamic of the polluters that are causing the problems with our air quality. You know, one of the fundamental studies on the health effects of bad air, of pollution, was done right here at BYU. And so we know that when we have bad air quality, it affects unborn children, it affects our young people, it affects our old people, it hurts our health immediately. So we have to be aggressive about controlling emissions that cause bad air quality. I like the idea of the Citizens Climate Lobby carbon fee and dividend proposal. What that would do is put a tax on carbon, but it would then take the money that came from that tax and refund it to households across America, because when you tax the carbon, you're going to raise the cost of the energy that's produced by solar and wind and other clean forms of energy. So that's something that I think is important. I would actually go a little bit beyond what the carbon fee and dividend proposal of the Citizens Climate Lobby proposes. I would raise the tax a bit more than that, to $25 a ton. The Brookings Institute says that at that level, the first year you would get $90 billion. And I would use some of that money, in addition to funding the refunds to our citizens to pay for energy, I would use it to help the industries that are affected negatively when we start to transition our economy away from coal and towards clean solar and wind.
Just remind you both to be sensitive to the time. Congressman Chaffetz.
Pierce, thank you, because you're observing what we all observe here in Utah, particularly in Salt Lake County. We do have a quality of air problem. And of course, what you throw in the air and what you throw into our rivers and streams is going to have effect on people's lives. I do believe, though, that it's going to be much more of a locally driven solution than some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. who's going to figure it out for you. And I can tell you, I am not voting for any tax increase. That will have the cruelest effect on the lowest income people within our communities. You're not just going to tax your way out of this. Now, I do believe in energy that should be developed, all of the above should be developed, from natural gas to coal to wind, solar, hydro. First bill I did was a hydroelectricity bill. Right up here in Utah County, 50 megawatts of energy out of Diamond Fork. So we've got to look at ways to fuel our future. Unlike what Hillary Clinton said, we're not energy independent, okay? We're not. But we've got to find ways, and I do believe that nuclear is a big part of it. If you want the cleanest energy, nuclear is one of those options.
Let me ask a follow-up question based on Pierce's, I think, very good question, which is, what are the incentives or disincentives that you would favor? And the Congressman just mentioned this should be a largely local matter. In that context, Provo, a city in this district, has recently voted to impose a surcharge on solar for families that decide to go solar. Would you favor such a surcharge yourselves if you were on the city commission? And are there incentives you would give to encourage people to use alternative energy sources? Mr. Tryon.
Well, I think the surcharge question is a local question, but I disagree strongly with Congressman Chaffetz that this can be a locally driven solution. I mean, energy is traded across our state borders. It has to be something that's controlled by the federal government at some level. So I think that the federal government has to have a role. We send a lot of energy to California, and one of the principal roles of our government is to control interstate commerce, and energy is a big thing that we sell back and forth.
Congressman Chaffetz.
Look, I believe that the energy we develop in this nation should be all of the above. I want to pursue every single one of those. But I have consistently voted against subsidizing any of these. I have been one of the few people in the Republican Party that has voted against the subsidies for the petroleum and gas industries. They know how to make money. We don't need to be subsidizing them, but I also don't want to be subsidizing the so-called green energy. I mean, look at what happened when the federal government did get involved, Solyndra and all these types of things. Like, really? The federal government thinks they can go figure this out? They took hundreds of millions of dollars out of our pockets, gave it to a company that went belly up. And it did nothing to actually change the equation. And then you go and look at what the Obama administration did and how to administer that. They were giving out to their buddies and their friends, and they were the ones that were getting the inside track. I don't trust the federal government. I want them to stay out of it. But I also want to get rid of those regulations so that we can develop further. the wind, the solar, the hydro, all those other things that are clean. And let's look at more nuclear. France is about 80% nuclear. We're about 20. You want clean energy, that's abundant. We do have the technology to do it.
Mr. Tryon, I'm going to give you an additional 15 seconds if you want to say more on this topic. Otherwise, we can move on.
Well, I support wind and solar, and what I would say to the congressman is that the federal government just invested a bunch of tax dollars in Arizona, and those tax dollars should have come to southeastern Utah. You know, the people in Price and the people in southeastern Utah are suffering. The economy there is not booming. We like to talk about the averages in Utah, but we need jobs in southeastern Utah. And the largest investment in solar energy made by the United States government has just gone into Mesquite, Arizona. And if you were doing your job, sir, I think a portion of that would have come to southeastern Utah.
Well, Mesquite's in Nevada, look, my job is not to just try to go pickpocket the federal government to try to just enrich some individual. That's not the role of the federal government. And I disagree with your whole idea that as you went to Carbon County and said, well, we're going to get out of the carbon business. 95% of our energy, electricity that's developed in this state comes from coal and from natural gas.
Clearly, Pierce asked a question both of you want to discuss. But let's move now to the next question.
I do want to say, though, that the Department of Defense plant is in Mesquite, Arizona.
Let's move to Jennifer Rood. She's going to ask a question. This one will go to Congressman Chaffetz first.
What are your positions on criminal justice reform and mass incarceration?
We got to understand, first of all, thank you for the question. Let's understand there are millions of people in our country that are incarcerated. About 95% of the people that go to prison, they're coming back out. I introduced and championed and have actually passed out of the Judiciary Committee a very bipartisan piece of legislation, widely supported by the President and the White House. Mike Lee on the one side, we've got senators on both sides of the aisle, Cory Booker. We have a choice. When people go to prison, they're either going to come out better criminals, or we can actually do what we should do, which is another piece of legislation I introduced, to change the name of the Bureau of Prisons at the federal level to the Department of Corrections. That's what we need to do. We need to get out of this cycle of particularly addictive drugs and drug crimes. We've got to address that because we can be the Department of Corrections, not just a place that's incarcerating people. You got to serve your punishment. You got to serve your time. But let's also take that money in a cheaper way. By the way, it saves people money to go through and actually correct that behavior. Texas is a good model. They're actually closing prisons in Texas. We should be doing that at the federal government side as well.
Mr. Tryon.
Well, I hate to say it, but I think this is a place where Congressman Chaffetz and I agree on something. I was really trying to avoid that tonight. The idea of incarcerating people for offenses that probably shouldn't have been criminalized in the first place is unwise. You know, marijuana originally was classified as a Schedule I drug, not by the Food and Drug Administration, which is the agency that normally does that. It was labeled as a Schedule I drug by the Department of Justice at the direction of President Nixon. So to me, what that means when you make marijuana a Schedule I drug, and I'm not an advocate for legalizing recreational marijuana, but I do think we need to legalize medical use of cannabis. And when you make something a Schedule I drug, what you do is you prevent people from studying it. So we've lived now from 1970 to now without really studying the effects, the possible medical benefits of marijuana, because we sort of arbitrarily schedule it as a Schedule I drug when it really probably shouldn't be. So that's an adjacent point, I guess. But we've got things in our criminal justice system that we're putting people in jail for that probably don't warrant it, and we should avoid doing that. So we agree on something.
I'm going to ask you a quick follow-up question and see if you still agree. Should felons be able to regain their rights to vote? Mr. Chaffetz?
I would not go down that path.
Well, I agree with that as well.
Okay, let's go to the next question. You're in a lot of agreement here. The question is about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and it comes from Travis Wald, who sent it into the Debate Commission website. Utah benefits greatly from global trade. especially white-collar workers on the Silicon Slopes. Do you support free trade in general and the TPP specifically? Mr. Tryon.
Look, the Trans-Pacific Partnership has some elements in it that I like, and those elements are the environmental features, and I like the idea of being able to improve trade in services. I don't like the idea of moving widgets from someplace in the world where they're made cheaper to America. We need to be able to stop shipping things back and forth and increasing reliance on local production of things. This, for me, is a carbon issue. Okay, we increase the carbon footprint of our economy when we ship a lot of goods from one side of the world to another. So I would not accept the TPP as it is currently framed, but I would like to revisit the idea of the service industry trade, because the U.S. has an $800 billion service industry as an export that I think we should try to enhance, and I think there's something we can get out of that. And at the same time, I think we should definitely pursue the environmental protections that are contained in the TPP. The TPP is a cooperative vehicle, and we need all the cooperative vehicles that we can get with the other nations of the world. And so there's some goodness there, but I wouldn't accept it as it is just because I don't like the carbon impact of it.
Congressman Chaffetz.
You asked generally, or am I afraid of, in favor of free trade? Absolutely. I want to have as much trading as we can. We're a global economy. Utah is very global in its approach, but I have said that I'm opposed to TPP. There are more than a dozen countries trying to come together. What I worry about is losing our own sovereignty, our own decision-making process. What I'd much rather do is pursue an avenue where you actually come with trade agreements with each individual country. We can go talk to New Zealand as between the United States and New Zealand. We're the biggest marketplace in the world. We have the assets, and we should use that negotiating power to get something that is favorable to the United States of America, that is fair, that is balanced, that does allow our markets to ebb and flow back and forth with goods and services, but I would pursue that on a case-by-case basis, country-by-country basis. You've seen how big and massive, it's something like 5,000 pages of documents, and trying to get all these countries, and then giving your sovereignty up to a board that's going to make decisions on how we deal with the dairymen, and how they deal with cattle, and how we deal with sugar, and so I would much rather do that one at a time, one country at a time. I think we can achieve the goal, come up with a better deal, and not give up any of our sovereignty.
Let me ask a follow-up question. Given what you both have just said, and you largely agree with each other again, what do you make of the argument that we need to do something to correct or counters, there's the word I was looking for, counter the influence of China in Asia, and that part of the benefits of TPP was going to assert an American role in those growing economies? Mr. Tryon and then Mr. Chaffetz.
Look, I fundamentally object to the idea of having to counter China as if it's some monolithic entity, and having the Chinese feel like they have to counter America as if we're all the same. You know, inside China, there's a bureaucracy, a government bureaucracy. Inside America, there's a government bureaucracy. And there's also millions of wonderful human beings. And so what I would prefer that we phrase our relationships with China in terms of trying to build bridges to reach out to the individual Chinese citizens, and that we understand that we've got lots of great human beings there that we should be building bridges with. Now, do we have to be worried about the bureaucracy of the Chinese military and the Chinese government? Yes, absolutely. And we need to be also controlling sort of the negative inertias of our own defense industry. So to me, the issue here is about making sure all human beings can live together in peace, and that we control, again, the negative effects, the negative inertias that come up when we start to let defense industries, whether they be Chinese defense industries or American defense industries, just go off on their own tangent.
Congressman Chaffetz, I'm going to add 30 seconds to equalize the time if you want to take it on this China side of the question.
Well, look, the best thing the United States of America can do is to start to increase its manufacturing, actually develop things. We tend to invent things, but then we send them overseas to be manufactured. We need an environment so that down in southern Utah and all across this country, we can actually have a manufacturing base. China is very good at this, and they do some things to manipulate currency. They're manipulating the trade through the South China Sea, the Danger Islands, the Spratly Islands. I visited extensively there to understand how they're trying to reconfigure how we do trade in this world. But the best thing we can do is lead by example, produce the best product at the best price we possibly can, put Americans back to work, and have those trading relationships one-on-one that they can't interject and they can't get in the middle of. That's what I'd like to see us do.
Let's go to the next question. It's from Ashley Johns. Please hold your applause. Ashley Johns, student, and she will be asking this question of Congressman Chaffetz.
Is the Public Lands Initiative the best option for the citizens of Utah? Why or why not?
Well, thank you, Ashley. I appreciate that. Look, I started when the Congressional district changed to try to find a solution because there's a lot of animosity. There's a lot of people that are concerned. They live in this era of uncertainty, particularly down in southern Utah. You got people with fifth-generation cattle ranching operations. You got people that want to engage in outdoor recreation. You got the world that wants to come visit. And I really wanted to try to find a balance between all of those interests and do it in a bipartisan way. So I followed the lead of Rob Bishop. We had more than 1,200 meetings. We've come up with a bipartisan solution. I mean, one option is do nothing. But I would actually like to solve this to create certainty. And I do think it is, first of all, it's the only bipartisan solution out there. And it is a balanced approach. And it does create this certainty for generations to come. It's just 7 counties, but it is a large swatch of land in Utah. And I think it is the right formula for us to move forward and then go try to tackle other things. Because there's lands worth preserving, but there's also lands that we need economic development on. And so we're trying to find that balance and that teeter-totter, and I'm very proud of the product that we've come up with. It's people are frustrated on both sides, people are happy on both sides, but it truly is a bipartisan approach.
Mr. Tryon.
Well, the Public Land Initiative reminds me of something that Senator Cleland used to say when he looked at a piece of legislation during my Senate fellowship. You know, he'd look at something and he'd say, Steve, that's sort of like a mackerel in the moonlight. It kind of shines and stinks at the same time. And to me, the PLI stinks more than it shines because I think we've got a corruption problem in Utah. You know, starting with Available Jones at the top and going all the way down to San Juan County where, a federal judge has just ruled that the county commission district lines are unconstitutional. And that's been a fight that's been going on for decades. And from my perspective, neither the governor nor Congressman Chaffetz has fulfilled his constitutional obligations to protect the Native Americans in San Juan County. And I think that's an issue that we have to address before we start talking about how we're going to carve up public lands. And then, just as an aside, it's maybe interesting to note that the member of the House of Representatives in Utah who is driving this quest to grab back lands from the federal government also happens to be one of our leading property developers in Utah. So, to me, I think there's a lot of reason to be suspect of a comprehensive bill like this. This is one where I would rather take it one county, one deal at a time. And Congressman Chaffetz always says that comprehensive legislation is bad. That's why he opposed comprehensive immigration reform, which would have saved us $300 million had the House taken it up after the Senate passed it in 2013.
Let's do a brief rebuttal on this. Congressman Chaffetz.
Well, if you look at the Utah Navajo Nation, for instance, Rebecca Benally is on the San Juan County Commission. She didn't start as being in favor of this, but now she is very much in favor of this. I listened to the 7 chapters that are here in Utah. They are very much in support of this piece of legislation and working closely with the Utah Navajo Nation. That's in part how we got to the solution that we have. It's 7 counties. It is millions of acres. I think it would be the 2nd largest land deal in the contiguous 48 in the history of the United States. It is a big deal. It will provide certainty. And part of the reason we're doing it is because we don't want Barack Obama to have the audacity to just unilaterally and offensively go and try to grab millions of acres and change the designation. There's a better way that's less offensive that will produce a better result than the Democrats who just want to grab it up and do it their way or no way.
Mr. Tryon, 45 seconds.
Well, if I were to advise President Obama on the Bears Ears Monument, which is what we're specifically talking to at this point, I would say that I, first of all, prefer a monument solution that will include co-management by the Native Americans, and that will include full access by Native Americans for hunting, gathering, and cultural activities. But I would advise President Obama to delay this until the next administration. And the reason I would advise that is because of the constitutional issue that I raised a few moments ago. You know, to me, I was down there at Secretary Jewell's hearing. I stayed all day. I took notes and little tick marks on who was for it and who was against it. And there was a lot of emotion in that room, and it was pretty evenly split. So to me, I would defer this until we get some resolution on a constitutional county commission that doesn't have 98% of the Native Americans in San Juan County grouped into one commission district. So basically, we've legislated that we'll only have one Native American commissioner. And I would do that first.
Thank you. As we near the midpoint of our time tonight, I welcome you once again to this debate between Stephen Tryon and Jason Chaffetz, candidates for U.S. Representative for Utah's 3rd Congressional District. You are joining us live on the campus of Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah. This debate, and others held in 2014 and 2016, are the result of a group of citizens and media outlets joining together to broadcast statewide a series of exchanges between candidates for statewide and federal office. Questions for this debate were submitted in advance to the Utah Debate Commission website. The UtahDebateCommission.org is that website. The aim is to better inform you, the voter, about the candidates. Now back to the questions. This one will come from Carver Coleman, whom I want to compliment on his bow tie, and it'll go to Mr. Tryon first.
Recent statistics show that on average, a graduate from the class of 2016 owes roughly $37,000 in student loans, and Americans of all ages are contributing to the student loan debt of $1.3 trillion. What is one specific policy do you advocate for in order to make college more affordable?
Mr. Tryon.
So the quick answer to your question is the one specific policy I would advocate for is zero interest loans for students. I think if we can offer zero interest loans to banks, if we can bail out corporations, we can also offer students zero interest loans. So I would do that. And I would just say that, education is the foundation of a strong economy. It's the foundation of a strong country. We can't have an informed citizenry if we don't have good education. Only 28% of Americans have a 4-year college degree. I think that's way too low. We need to shift the paradigm so that we move to a K through 16 standard. And we also need to use the same kinds of programs to allow people who want to just go to the technical level past high school to get resources for that as well. I've been blessed. I've got a bachelor's degree from West Point, a master's degree from Stanford, and I taught at West Point for 3 years. I'm actually pursuing a computer science degree now at Salt Lake Community College. So for me, I think we need to make learning and education a lifetime activity for all Americans, and we need to build the financial structures that make that happen.
Congressman Chaffetz.
Well, Carver, I wish nothing but the best to you. You seem like a fine young man who's starting on their trajectory of a new career and new direction, and I've got a couple kids in that same place. And I think what we need to do is, obviously, we want you to be able to have access to take out a loan if you so want to, but I also think that the private sector should also be able to compete in that. Under the Obama administration, they pushed out the competition so that the credit unions or Zions and others can't offer loans. The other thing that I think we do need to do is we need to do more vocational training. Everything doesn't have to be a 4-year degree. I visited with automobile dealers here in Utah. You know what they said? They've got mechanic jobs available right now. These are jobs that pay about $100,000 a year, but they have to send them to New Mexico in order to get trained. So we need to be making sure that as you start out on your career, or before that, your parents, you are looking at your education, you can get it maybe through a private. Maybe there's something online that you want to do. We need to be a little bit more creative, more flexible that way. we also need to make sure that they can go and pursue other avenues of welding jobs and other types of vocational skills. And then I just want to make sure that you have the opportunity and the experience, or the viewpoint, if you will, to understand what are they hiring for. Because I don't think we do a good job of communicating to a person like you to say, here's what you can expect to earn, here's where the job demand is. Because all too often we have people go get a degree to nowhere. There's no jobs available. And we're training them on the wrong thing. Last point I'd make is we better catch up in terms of understanding technology in the IT world. It is the future. Those that focus on that, I think that needs to be part of the curriculum from a very young age.
In the interest of getting to more questions, I think we could pass on rebuttal here. You largely agreed. There were some differences. Any disagreement? If not, let's go to Zachary Hurst. This question will first go to Congressman Chaffetz. Zachary?
The resettlement of Syrian refugees has been a topic on the minds of many college students. If elected, how will you balance the humanitarian need of the refugees while keeping us safe from a group that has the potential to be infiltrated by terrorist groups?
No, thanks, Zachary. I appreciate it. Look, the threat is real. It's persistent and it's real. This summer, I actually went to Jordan and right across the border and saw that, literally 85,000 people in a refugee camp. You have terrorism that's happening in Europe and that wants to come to the shores of the United States. So we are an open and welcoming country, but we have to be able to vet these people. We have to understand who they are. We have a refugee population in Utah. It's about 30,000 plus. Good people, feel for them. Your heart opens up that they suddenly got to place. Maybe they were a doctor in their own country, and of course we're going to have open arms. But we've got to make sure that we vet these people. When you have the director of the FBI telling us we don't have the background, we don't know who they are, then let's take our time and let's make sure, because it only takes a few in the wrong spot at the wrong time. So I do think we can balance the compassion, but I wouldn't just automatically, as the president has done, say, hey, let's take 10,000 plus Syrians into the borders of the United States of America without properly vetting them. That puts our own country at risk, and it's not a risk that I want to take. I want to make sure that they're vetted as best we possibly can, and take care of them once they're here and try to help get them jobs and get them right on the right trajectory. But just opening it up and bringing everybody here, I just don't think we can afford to do it, and I don't think it's in our national security interests.
Mr. Tryon.
Look, I think the number is nobody said that we're not going to vet people that we bring in from Syria. Of course we're going to vet them. Whether the administration has committed to accept 10,000 Syrian refugees, to me, that doesn't mean we've committed to accepting one terrorist. Of course, nobody's going to accept a terrorist. I think that, the Statue of Liberty says, give me your poor, your oppressed. That's who we're dealing with here with these refugees coming from Syria. So, Congressman Chaffetz and I agree on this. We're saying the same thing. We want to be compassionate to accept the refugees in. I'm just objecting to the notion that because the administration has committed to a number, that means that they're not concerned about security. The Obama administration is just as concerned about security as anybody in our government. And of course we're going to vet the people that we bring in as Syrian refugees. The other point I want to make here, and it goes back to something that we started this conversation with tonight, we have to be able to maintain surveillance on electronic communications at some level. If we're going to keep America safe in the future, we have to have an intelligence capability. Now, if you're an American and you're not doing anything wrong, and we can guarantee you or assure you that this is all being depersonalized and it's just metadata that we're considering, the government can make good use of being able to provide surveillance. That's one of the vetting things that we should be doing on an ongoing basis with this population.
Let me build on Zachary's question and ask a short question. One of the presidential candidates earlier in the campaign advocated excluding a group by its religion, Muslims. That was Mr. Trump. Mr. Chaffetz, first, do you support Mr. Trump's view on excluding Muslims? We've talked about Syrians in Zach's question. Same question for you.
No, and in
Mr.
fact,
Tryon.
I went on national television and said to exclude somebody based solely on their religion is wrong. In fact, I took it a step further and visited a couple of mosques that we have here in Utah to reach out to that community and say, well, I think you're actually part of the solution, not necessarily part of the problem. And we all live here in Utah, and you're all Utahns, and I think we as a community can go out and do a better job of reaching out to religious minorities in our own backyard. And so I think that was wrong. I think it was ill-advised. We need to look at behavior. We need to look at for certain other key indicators. But the idea and suggesting that we're going to monitor everybody scares the living crap out of me. I'm not going to put up with it. There is no way, no how. I trust my federal government to track me. And you know what? That's why I introduced a bill. And that is so totally fundamentally different. Oh, sure, just let everybody watch whatever I do because I don't do anything wrong. You know what? Your geolocation is metadata. And that, I have asked 2 attorneys general and 2 FBI directors. Nobody can answer it. The reality is the government is tracking you, and I'm trying to fight every step of the way, and this is not helping.
So, Mr. Tryon, I'm going to give you an extra 30 seconds to balance the time if you'd like to take it. But
Look,
the Muslim question first, and then we can go back to monitoring.
Yeah. You know, Congressman Chaffetz, we disagree on a lot of things, but I want to tell you, when I read that you had gone to the mosques in downtown Salt Lake City, I was proud of you. I think that was a fine thing to do. I absolutely disapprove of what Congressman, or what Mr. Trump, yeah, thank goodness he's just Mr., right? I absolutely disapprove of what Mr. Trump proposed, and I think that, immigrants, my grandfather was an immigrant from Ireland, and religious tests have no place in America as far as I'm concerned. So that's the answer to that question. And then I guess what I would say is, in the wake of 9/11, with 3,000 plus Americans dead, we implemented something called the Patriot Act, and that included some measures to surveil against people in the United States. And we all agreed that that was a wise thing to do because we didn't want 9/11 to happen again. And what I'm telling you is that in a world where nuclear proliferation is an issue, we've got to be concerned about threats coming from abroad. And I would err on the side of not allowing another 9/11 rather than on the side of letting that happen again.
As we all know, because there will be a debate later tonight, interest at the top of the ticket remains high. Do you support the nominee of your party for president? Why or why not? Mr. Tryon first.
Absolutely, I support Hillary Clinton for president. You know, when I was on my Senate fellowship, I had the privilege of working in the office of Senator Max Cleland and ran a resolution for him that Hillary Clinton signed onto. And so I did a press conference, and she came, and I saw her then. And then when I was working in the Pentagon, I would bring over senior generals to meet with Hillary Clinton because of Fort Drum and some of the other military interests that she had in her concern. I find Hillary Clinton to be a patriot. I think she is a good civil servant. I think she's been wrongfully characterized by Congressman Chaffetz. I think this is a blatant case where he has politicized his duties as a congressman, which is one of my biggest objections to the way you go about doing your business. I think that all of this nonsense about emails and the quid pro quo stuff that we watched unfold this last weekend, you've mischaracterized event after event in order to create publicity for yourself and to undermine the candidate of the opposing party, and it's absolutely unconscionable. You know, I had a secret clearance when I was 18, a top secret clearance when I was 33, and I've been a courier of classified information all over the world. And what you haven't told the American people is that during all this time about the emails, Hillary Clinton was the original classification authority, the person who had the authority to classify, declassify, and reclassify information in the State Department. And all of this comes out of Executive Order 13526.
Congressman Chaffetz.
Well, she is the originator, and that's the problem, is she decided to put on a .com address instead of the secure facility. If you had done that, you would have gone to jail. And what people are mystified is that they look at Lady Justice, who's supposed to have a blindfold, but it seems to, they seems to peek and look and see if it's a Clinton along the way. The United States Congress has a duty, a constitutional duty, to be the check and the balance on the executive branch. Of course that's what we're supposed to do. Our committee was founded in 1814. Abraham Lincoln served on this. The first thing that Abraham Lincoln did is he got the nickname Spotty. He went after the president because he didn't believe the president. He wanted to know where the Mexican-American War was done. Of course we hold people accountable. Of course we go after the president. My job's not to be a cheerleader for the president. My job is to hold him accountable, trust but verify. It's the FBI that came up with the conclusion. It's the FBI agent who said there was a quid pro quo discussion going on here. Look at the Wall Street Journal editorial. That's what was happening. To your core question, Dr. Magleby, I withdrew my endorsement of Donald Trump. Now, I am in the never Hillary, never ever. I think she's a liar. I think she lies. I think she uses cronyism to new levels. I cannot say enough bad things about her. But you know what? The people here in Utah, we're going to have to figure out who we are going to vote and support. I happen to stand on principle. And you know what? If it's a Democrat or Republican, if you're doing and saying those things, I'm going to call you out. So we're going to have to go forward and figure it out. I like the idea of Donald Trump, somebody new from the outside coming in. I like that idea. I think the policies are largely right. But for the person himself, I can't look my wife and daughter in the eye and say I endorse that person. I just had to withdraw my support.
Again, I think we've covered much of that ground. Let's go to,
I would
rebuttal?
like to actually reply because, once again, Congressman Chaffetz has told one side of the story. Yes, I would have gone to jail if I had done some of the things Hillary Clinton had done. That's because I was subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
It's exactly right. That's exactly what I'm fighting for.
That's exactly right. Please let him
But the
finish.
point is, I was subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And the Executive Order 13526...
And you support that person.
Congressman, please let him finish.
13526 gives you different standards of maintaining control over classified information. Of course it's different. In the military, when I was a company commander at Fort Bragg, if you said something bad about your squad leader, I could take half your pay and restrict you to barracks. Would you like that to be also the way we treat civilians in our society? I don't think so. There's a different, higher standard for the military, and it's there for a reason.
And there's a different standard for Hillary Clinton. That's the problem. That's the problem.
Okay. So a brief rebuttal, or can we move to the next question?
No, let's...
Okay, the next question comes from Scott Bell. Mr. Bell.
What steps have you taken or will you take to ensure the safety and security of our overseas embassies?
This goes to Congressman Chaffetz first.
Boy, I tell you, I have traveled everywhere from Port Moresby to Mozambique. I've been to Libya twice, and after the wake of what happened on 9/11 there in Benghazi, I was the first member of Congress to go out there. And the State Department told me that they had fixed many of the problems. I don't believe them. And that's what you're supposed to do, is get out and go visit. And I can't even tell you how many countries I've been to where the State Department has told me that they've implemented a certain degree of security, only to find out once I'm there on the ground, I talk to the local Marines, I talk to the Chargé, I talk to the people that are working there and say, no, that's not true. And so you'll see a report coming out of the Oversight Committee probably in the November, December timeframe, but I've taken this very seriously. We got a lot of Utahns who serve overseas. Some of them are missionaries, some are with various religious organizations, some are expats, they just like foreign service. And we have a duty and obligation to help protect them and make sure that that sovereign territory there in those countries, these embassies, these consulates, that they're properly secured. And I tell you, I've probably done more than just about anybody in the House or Senate to make sure that we learn those lessons. We didn't learn them after the bombings in Africa. We didn't implement the Inman standards as required by law. Too many waivers given along the way. And we better darn well learn what happened in Benghazi, because heaven forbid, we never want that to happen again.
Mr. Tryon.
Look, I'm an old soldier, so I understand the importance of keeping a good defense for our diplomacy, our diplomats abroad, as well as for our military installations. And when I look at this idea of defending our diplomatic installations, I think of intelligence. We have to understand what the threat is. We have to have the best intelligence in the world, robust intelligence. And then we have to, once we've identified those threats, embed the right capabilities in the places where our diplomats live and work. And then we have to have quick reaction forces that can reinforce as necessary. And all of this has to be done with coordination between agencies. That's one of the big things that came out of the Benghazi report. I've read the recommendations of the Select Committee on Benghazi, and I actually concur with those recommendations. What I don't concur with is the politicizing of the deaths of Americans overseas. And Congressman, this is a really personal one for me, because just a few days after the Deputy Chief of Mission came back and testified in front of the House, you went on Fox News and you made some inflammatory comments that were false. And basically those comments were insulting to the point of inferring or implying that a State Department or a military official would withhold a force when an American life was in danger. And it was determined, the timeline was established, that There was no one told to stand down that could have gone and saved lives. Your timeline was inaccurate. The statement was false. And you were grandstanding and politicizing the deaths of Americans. And that, sir, is unconscionable.
Now,
Let me limit your rebuttals. I'm going to have you both rebut, but 20 seconds. We're getting close to the end of the program. Congressman Chaffetz.
You are absolutely, totally wrong. You talk to the people who, that movie 13 Hours, that 13 Hours in Benghazi, you talk to them. You ask them if there was a stand-down order, because they will swear on their life that there was a stand-down order. And when I talked to General Ham, who was in charge that night, he's told me they had proximity, they had capability, but they did not go. And the reality is, if you read the report, not a single United States asset was ordered to go into Benghazi. And that is just unconscionable. But we should be so infuriated. That night, Hillary Clinton and the Secretary of Defense never even spoke. So I could go on for hours about this, sir, but you are fundamentally and totally wrong. When America's in danger, when America's under attack, we go fight to save those people. That never happened that night.
Congressman, I've been in a
Tryon,
firefight
20
on the other side
please.
of the world, and I don't need you to lecture me about that. What I know is that nobody's waiting for the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense to defend themselves. And what I know is that specifically what we were talking about is your assertions on Fox News were false. The timeline that you asserted happened was false.
Okay, Mr. Tryon, I need to limit it now. We're going to be going to the close. We're approaching the conclusion of this hour, and we have time remaining for each candidate to present a 1-minute closing statement. Just before the debate, it was determined that Representative Chaffetz will speak first. Thank you, Mr. Chaffetz. You're up now.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all of you that have watched and listened to this. And I want to thank my opponent for stepping up and willing to serve. And it is good. We should have more debates, not less debates. I think they're a healthy part of the process. I'm asking for your vote. I'm asking for your support. I would love to go back to Congress. I've been fortunate enough to be elected by my colleagues to be the chairman of the House Oversight Committee. And bringing the fight to Washington, D.C. to fight for those core principles that I believe in so dearly: fiscal discipline, limited government, accountability, and a strong national defense. We adhere to the Constitution, we do those 4 things, and this country will be back on the trajectory that it should be. There are a lot of problems, there are a lot of messes out here in Washington, D.C. and in this country. But you know what? At the end of the day, the United States of America is the greatest country on the face of the planet. And to be able to serve and be your representative, to be able to do that is an honor and a privilege. And I'm asking for your vote as it comes up. I'm Jason Chaffetz. I appreciate you hearing me out. And thank you, and thank you, and thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Chaffetz. Mr. Tryon, please hold the applause until we're all done. Then we're going to robustly applaud. Mr. Tryon.
Well, thank you all for listening and watching the debate tonight. You know, 2 years ago, my opponent told me that I was his second favorite candidate. And I don't think I've moved up any on his list. In fact, I might have even moved down a bit. But I hope I've moved up on some of your lists or gotten your attention out there tonight. You know, this is a very important election for the 3rd Congressional District and also for our country. It's important. We've given you a distinct choice between 2 different visions of public service. And I will always tell you that I think I'm the best choice. But the fact of the matter is that whomever we all choose together on November 8th is the right choice, because we have a Constitution and we have procedures that we follow to decide what's right for all of us. It's not the republic of me, and it's not the republic of Congressman Chaffetz. It's the republic of all of us together, as long as we can keep it, right? Like Ben Franklin said. And what we've done here tonight, that's how we keep it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tryon. My thanks to Jason Chaffetz and Stephen Tryon for their participation this evening. They are candidates for Utah's 3rd Congressional District. Thanks to those who submitted and asked questions, and also special appreciation to the administration, faculty, staff, and students of Utah Valley University for hosting this event on their campus. I would like to invite you to visit the Utah Debate Commission website at utahdebatecommission.org. There you will also find a video archive that will contain this and all of this season's prior debates. Vital to retaining our more than 2-century-long experiment with self-government is your participation by voting. We often celebrate the Constitution on the 4th of July, but many fail to take the time to inform themselves and vote. It is reported that as the Constitutional Convention concluded, having agreed on our most important governmental document, a woman asked Benjamin Franklin, "What kind of government have you given us, Dr. Franklin? A republic or a monarchy?" Franklin answered, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." Participation by voting is one way we affirm our commitment to self-government. Each of us has the opportunity to vote for the candidate of our choice on November 8th. I urge you to exercise your right and vote in this year's election. I'm David Magleby. Good evening.
Hey, thank you. Thank you.